That night, when they rolled a bulldozer toward my woods, with two guys in cheap private security jackets blocking my gate and the HOA president screaming about some fake emergency order, I honestly thought I was about to watch my land get stolen in real time. 10 minutes later, those same guys were face down on the pavement in cuffs. The sheriff was reading her rights off a thumb drive I helped create, and I was just standing there on my deck thinking, yeah, that happened. Before I tell you how we got there, do me a favor and file this away in the back of your mind. Ask yourself how far you'd let someone push you if they were absolutely convinced they were the one in charge, even when they were dead wrong. So, my name is Ethan Cole. I make maps for a living. Not the fun kind with pirate treasure, the boring kind with parcel lines and elevations and zoning codes. But I love it. I really do. Because lines make sense to me. They tell you where something starts and where it stops, and who gets to decide what happens in between. And for most of my adult life, I thought, as long as you respected those lines and you had your name on a deed, you were safe. You know what I mean? So when my wife Hannah and I bought 4 acres of scruffy woods just outside this polished subdivision called Silver Ridge Meadows, I felt pretty good about it. On one side of this tiny metal survey pin in the grass, you had us. Tall oaks, a little creek at the back, a crooked split-rail fence that had been there since the 80s. One ceramic gnome Hannah snuck in when she thought I wouldn't notice. And on the other side, you had Silver Ridge. Identical mailboxes. Perfect lawns, shrubs trimmed like they were auditioning for a magazine cover, and a homeowners association that at the time I thought I could just ignore, because my realtor literally tapped the plat map with her pen and said, "Right here. Ethan, you are outside the HOA. They do not have jurisdiction over this parcel." And I remember thinking, great. They can keep their rules. I'll keep my trees. For a while, it was peaceful. Just birds, frogs, the occasional raccoon, knocking over the trash, and then one morning, right before sunrise, I woke up to a sound that did not belong in a quiet neighborhood. This deep diesel growl, like a big engine idling where no engine should be, and Hannah was already at the window pulling the blinds apart with her fingers whispering, "Ethan, there is something huge at the fence, and you know that feeling when your stomach drops before your brain even catches up. That was me pulling on jeans and boots and walking out onto the deck, half awake. Parked inches from my fence was a bright yellow bulldozer engine, rumbling low like it was clearing its throat. Before a speech leaning against it was a big guy in a hard hat. Looking bored and in front of it, perfectly posed in a spotless white tracksuit, was the president of the Silver Ridge HOA, a woman named Madison Holt, arms crossed like she owned the sunrise. The street and my side of the fence too, and I knew who she was. Just from reputation, the kind of person who sends emails about your trash can being visible for 4 extra minutes. She looked up at me, and that plastic smile snapped onto her face. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she called out, all cheerful venom. "Beautiful day for a little community improvement." And right away my brain went, this is not going to be good. But I walked down the hill to the fence, stayed on my side, tried to keep my voice low and calm, because I've learned if they're loud, you go quiet. "Morning, Madison," I said. "That is a very large piece of equipment parked against my fence. You planning on digging a pool on your side? Or should I be worried?" And her smile tightened, like I'd said something offensive. She lifted a sheet of paper between 2 fingers, like it was carved in stone, and said, "We're clearing the buffer zone. This unmanaged brush is a fire hazard and an eyesore. The board voted to reclaim this area and install a meadow everyone can enjoy." And she gestured at my trees, my brush, my land, like she was pointing at a pile of trash. I bent down, tapped the metal survey pin, half buried in the grass right under the fence, and said, "Your property ends right here. Everything on this side is mine. There is no reclaim happening today." And I will never forget the way she actually laughed at that short, sharp, humorless. Like the very idea that I could say no to her was absurd. "The Silver Ridge covenants give us authority over the buffer zone," she snapped. "We have a work order. We don't need your permission." And the contractor smirked, like he'd heard that line 100 times, and it always worked. I could feel my pulse climbing, but I kept my voice almost soft. "Okay then, show me the county permit. Show me the notice with my parcel number on it. Because until I see that if your guy steps one boot on my side of this fence, I will call the sheriff and report trespassing." And I looked at the contractor when I said it, not at her. And his smirk faltered just enough to tell me I'd hit the right nerve. Madison's smile disappeared completely. For a second, I thought she might actually climb the fence, but she turned to him instead and hissed under her breath. And he backed off, and that's when I realized this wasn't a simple HOA busybody moment. This was somebody who was used to getting her way and just got told no for the first time in a long time. The young deputy who finally showed up looked like he badly wanted coffee and a transfer. He listened to Madison rant about fire danger and community standards, while she waved a fancy piece of paper with the HOA logo at him. Then he listened to me explain that my land was outside the HOA. I had a deed, a survey, the whole 9 yards, and he took her paper, turned it over, squinted like maybe a judge's signature would magically appear, then sighed and said, "Ma'am, this is an HOA work order, not a court order. I can't let you take down his fence or trees based on this. If you believe this land is yours, you'll need to take it to civil court for now. You need to stay on your side of the fence." And the look on her face when an actual authority figure told her no was something to see. As he walked back to his cruiser, he leaned closer to me and said quietly, "Sir, I'd make sure your markers are clearly visible. I've got a feeling this isn't over." And Hannah, who had been filming the whole thing from the deck, caught Madison leaning toward the contractor and muttering, "The line is moving one way or another," before she gave me this look of pure, concentrated hatred, like I'd stolen something from her, instead of the other way around. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't over either. After that, the bulldozer disappeared, but the envelopes started, those cream-colored Silver Ridge envelopes, showing up in my mailbox like junk mail with teeth. Even though I wasn't in their HOA first, it was a citation for unauthorized flora with a made-up fine. Then non-compliant boundary structure for my 30-year-old fence. Then a visual pollution notice with a zoomed-in photo of Hannah's gnome like it was evidence in a criminal trial. And Hannah paced my kitchen, waving that paper, going, "They can't do this. We aren't even in their stupid HOA." And I knew she was right. But I also knew Madison was trying to do exactly one thing: make our lives so miserable that we'd either cave or sell, and she'd win by default. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I also don't really regret it. I sat down at my computer and designed the most official-looking fake document I have ever made in my life. Big ornate border, serious fonts, and at the top, in bold letters, "Official permit to mind your own business." Underneath, I wrote things like, "The bearer of this permit is authorized to grow trees of any size and display whimsical lawn ornaments without consulting any HOA known to man." Signed it with a flourish, laminated it, and zip-tied it right to the fence, facing Madison's house. Then added a tiny QR code at the bottom that linked to the county's own plat map with a blinking blue dot labeled "Not Your Land." And when I checked the logs later and saw multiple scans from the Silver Ridge Clubhouse Wi-Fi, It felt like I'd scored at least one small point. Then a certified letter arrived, and the humor drained out of the situation real quick. Certified mail is a different animal. You sign for it. Your stomach sinks before you even open it. Inside was this multi-page environmental enhancement initiative that sounded like it had been focus grouped by 10 lawyers, talking about erosion control and invasive species and creek preservation. And buried in the middle was the schedule for a community cleanup day that would start right at the rear boundary of my address, my backyard, my trees. No mention of my consent anywhere. It was basically them sending out invitations to a group trespass on my land and hoping the language would make it feel legitimate. That night, Hannah and I sat at the dining table with that packet spread out between us, and we both had the same feeling. This just got serious. This isn't an annoying neighbor. This is someone willing to drag a whole neighborhood into her power trip. And that's when the part of my brain that loves data woke up and said, okay, if they're going to move the line, we're going to catch it on camera. I own a drone for work, actually. A few, but my favorite one is small quiet with GPS and a thermal camera. I call it Night Owl. And a few nights later, I set up a little command center in the living room. Monitor controller cold coffee, then launched Night Owl up over the tree line and parked it above the boundary between my woods and Silver Ridge, just watching that edge where my world ended, and theirs began. And for a couple of hours, it was nothing but deer and raccoons and one stray cat. To the point where I started thinking I was being paranoid then. Around 2 a.m, a dark van rolled up with its headlights off, and 2 guys climbed out carrying a stake puller and a canvas bag. On the screen, I watched them walk straight to one of my official survey pins, like they had been there before. One of them bent down, wrestled the iron rod out of the ground, tossed it into the brush like trash. The other drove a plain wooden stake into the dirt at about 30 feet inside my side of the line. Then they did it again at the next corner, and the next, literally redrawing the map in the dark, stealing a long strip of my land stake by stake. And somewhere under the anger in my chest, there was this cold, clear thought. Thank God I have this on video. I switched the camera to 4K night view and zoomed in on one guy's face as he turned toward the street, a little grainy, but enough for me to recognize him from a Silver Ridge board meeting I'd sat through once. He was the landscaper Madison had introduced as our exclusive beautification partner. His name was Trevor, and here he was committing a felony for her under cover of darkness. Madison's next move was to go public. Of course, she posted in the neighborhood app some dramatic picture taken from her porch, making my woods look like a haunted jungle. Long paragraph about fire risk and property values, and an adjacent landowner who refuses to cooperate, painting me as this crazy recluse, dragging the whole community down, then calling an emergency HOA meeting to vote on funding a common area improvement project, which translated meant, please pay for my land grab, when I walked into that clubhouse as the villain in someone else's story. I could feel the stares, people whispering, judging, and Madison at the front behind a lectern blazer, on voice polished like she'd been rehearsing in the mirror, talking about safety and standards, and how one property owner's neglect puts everyone at risk, doing everything but pointing at me with a laser pointer, then finally saying they needed to approve funds to restore the buffer zone the board has already determined is necessary. And I remember standing up, heart thumping, and saying, I don't really want to say much. I'd just like to show a short video if that's okay. And watching her face flicker, because she knew she couldn't say no in front of everyone without looking saskered. The lights went down. The projector came on, and instead of her scary woods photo, The room saw night owl's footage. 2 glowing figures in thermal creeping up to my survey stakes, ripping them out, hammering new ones inside the line. Then we switched to color, zoomed on Trevor's face, and someone in the back said, "Wait, isn't that the landscaper?" Then another person said, "Is that on his land?" And suddenly, all those eyes that had been aiming at me swung toward her. I stepped up next to the screen and said, "I make maps for a living. I know what a boundary looks like, and I know what it looks like when someone is moving at 30 feet at 2 in the morning. This is your contractor on my property, changing the line." And you could feel the mood in the room tilt like a table shifting. Madison snapped. Of course, said it was fake, edited. Called me a liar. Raised her voice, then doubled down, and announced that the community cleanup was happening anyway that Saturday, and that this time, the county was sending an inspector to enforce environmental regulations, like she'd just opened a cheat code. Saturday rolled around, and instead of a crowd of neighbors in gloves and sneakers, it was just her, in another white tracksuit. Trevor looking miserable, and a guy in a polo with a county logo and a clipboard. Big friendly grin. "I'm Inspector Briggs from Land Use," he said, flashing a badge so fast I couldn't have read it if I'd tried talking loud about complaints and authority, and I just leaned on my side of the fence and said, "Cool. Then you'll have a copy of the order that lets you onto my private property, right, the one with my parcel number, and the statute, and the judge's signature. I'd love to see that." And he fumbled his papers and said, "It's a standard compliance action. The order's on file downtown." And I just smiled and said, "So you came to enforce an order you can't show." The homeowner got it. Madison rolled her eyes. Told Trevor to get the trimmer, and when he stepped up and shoved me on the shoulder to move me out of the way, Hannah's voice from the porch cut through the air. "I got that on video, that's assault," and you could physically see his shoulders drop as he remembered how fast a shove can turn into charges when there's a camera involved. The same young deputy showed up again, and this time when I showed him the clip of the shove, his whole energy changed. He looked at Trevor and asked, "Did you put your hands on him?" Got the classic "I just nudged him" answer. Shook his head and said, "That's not what it looks like on his video." Then turned to Madison and said, "Ma'am, last time I told you this was a civil dispute. It's turning into a criminal one. Now I strongly suggest you and your friends leave this property and do not come back." When that night sitting at the dining table that had turned into our war room surrounded by printouts and maps and a laptop full of video, I realized we were way past HOA drama. We were in full-blown conspiracy territory, and if we didn't take it seriously, we were going to lose something. We couldn't get back, so we went all in. We pulled every document we had. The original deed. The county survey, Hannah dug through the county code and found the creek ordinance Madison kept shouting about, and discovered a lovely little clause that said it only applied to subdivisions built after 2016, meaning we were grandfathered in, meaning she'd been twisting the law, hoping nobody would read it. And when we started digging into Trevor's company and saw it was registered under Madison's sister's name, it finally clicked that this wasn't just about control. It was about money. The treasurer, Allen, gave us the last piece when he slipped that thumb drive into our mailbox, full of invoices from that shell landscaping company, and emails between Madison, Trevor, and Briggs, openly talking about moving my stakes and paying the inspector a consulting fee. And that's the point where our lawyer looked at everything and said, "This is a slam dunk," had me call Briggs, let him brag about his power on a recorded line, then introduce himself and ask for the statute and docket number, and when Briggs couldn't produce either, and hung up, and 2 minutes later, Madison called me screaming, "What did you say to him? What did you do?" She basically confessed on tape that she and the inspector were in it together. After that, the sheriff and the DA had everything. The drone footage, the emails, the invoices, the recordings. So when that last night rolled around, and Madison sent a bigger bulldozer, 2 fake security guys and Trevor back to my fence at midnight, thinking she could scare us into submission before the law caught up. What she actually did was walk straight into the one thing she had never believed in from the beginning, a line she could not cross without consequences. The motion lights kicked on. Hannah called 911. I stepped onto the deck, filming the security guys tried to tell me it was a private matter and to go back inside. But this time, when the squad cars rolled up, they didn't come slow and quiet. They flew in, boxed in the flatbed, put the guards on the ground in cuffs when they tried to play tough. And then Madison pulled up in her Lexus in silk pajama pants and bare feet and started screaming about how she had hired them, and it was all legal, while the sergeant just held up that little evidence bag with the thumb drive and said, "Miss Holt, we've listened to your calls and read your emails and watched your contractor move his stakes. You know exactly what's going on. Madison Holt, you have the right to remain silent." And in that surreal blinking red and blue light, I watched the woman who had told me over and over that she controlled my land get turned into what she really was, one more person in handcuffs who thought the rules didn't apply to her. The court part took months and was not nearly as cinematic. There was no dramatic trial, just pleas and paperwork. Madison ended up pleading guilty to fraud, and conspiracy had to pay back everything she had funneled to her sister's fake company, and a big personal fine on top of it. And the judge barred her from serving on any HOA board in the state ever again, which might be the most beautiful sentence I've ever heard. The inspector lost his job and license. Trevor got probation. The company was dissolved, and Hannah and I got a permanent order, keeping all of them far away from us and our property to us. A restoration of the small bit of creek bank they'd managed to chew up paid for by the new HOA board that formed after the residents realized where their dues had been going. These days, if you stand on my deck, all you hear is wind in the trees, frogs down by the water, maybe Hannah laughing at her 2 gnomes by the bird bath. And I wish I could tell you I never think about it anymore, but I do. Because I know that if I didn't make maps, if I didn't have a drone, if Hannah wasn't stubborn enough to dive into county code, if Alan hadn't quietly decided his conscience mattered more than his fear that line might have moved and never gone back, and our story would be a whole lot different. So I'm going to ask you this, and I really want you to answer in the comments because I know a lot of you have your own scars from this kind of thing. Do you think this was just one bad HOA Karen getting what she deserved? Or is there something broken in a system where a volunteer board and a clipboard can get this close to stealing someone's land? And have you ever had a neighbor or a HOA or even a small-time official try to push you around because they thought you didn't know your rights? What happened? Did you fight back? Did anyone listen? Tell me your story down there. Let's talk about it. And if you think more people need to hear stories like this, where the little guy actually wins, hit like, share it. Subscribe if you want to, because lines only mean something if we're willing to defend them. And sometimes, all it takes is one person saying, "No, not this time," and meaning it.